Fran. I'm the director of the Melikian Center here at ASU. Delighted to see you all here for what, by my calculation, though I may be corrected, is the 20th Mary Choncoff lecture, because we missed a few years since 1998 when it started. I just want to give a little bit of background before I introduce our speaker, who we're delighted to have, Professor Christina Kramer, emeritus from the University of Toronto. I just want to say a couple of words about the Mary Choncoff legacy and how we're carrying it forward, and other ways beyond listening to this, coming to this lecture. If you're interested in getting to know more about the country of North Macedonia or the city of Skopje, some ways you can do it. So Mary Choncoff was a long-time resident, librarian, bookseller, and friend of all things Macedonian, and especially Macedonian American exchange, who lived here in Tempe for many years. And when she passed away, a number of her friends, including several of the folks here, decided to establish this lecture in her memory. And so for most years, since the late 1990s, Arizona State University's Melikian Center, or Arizona State University, and then the Melikian Center has hosted a speaker, often from Macedonia, but also experts on Macedonia, scholars and friends of Macedonia. We've been teaching Macedonian language here at ASU, one of the few places in North America that has done so consistently. We've been teaching since, I believe, the 1980s. And in 1991 began offering it in our Summer Critical Languages Institute, where students can take a full year of language equivalent credit in 7 or 8 weeks, taught by master instructors, often from the countries that you're learning the language of. And especially for those of you who are students here who are who's still thinking about international careers or perspectives beyond the United States, less commonly taught languages are a passport into careers, scholarship opportunities, but most importantly, just a different perspective, a way of seeing the world. And so any students who are interested in expanding their horizons in that way, please let one of us know. We actually have, I think I just saw Jafar arrive, who is our Critical Languages Institute coordinator here tonight. ASU has also been in Tempe and Skopje became sister cities in the early 1970s. And this is Tempe's oldest sister city relationship with Skopje in North Macedonia, which celebrated its 50th year anniversary in 2022. There's also been a very long exchange with the University of St. Cyril and Methodius in Skopje, and ASU's faculty is enriched by graduates from that university. And we also have a number of folks who trained at that university, a number of folks who taught at that university, and at least one person who has an honorary doctorate from that university. So it's a robust relationship which the Melikian Center is doing what it can to maintain and grow as we go forward. Again, for students, we do run a study abroad program, non-language based, where we travel to Greece, Bulgaria, North Macedonia, and Albania in the summer. If you want to know more about that, Dr. Sivak at the back there is the person who devised this in the first place and has run it for 4 or 5 years now. And as I said, so we're always looking for ideas and ways to expand the relationship between Tempe and Skopje. So if other folks have other ideas here, members of the local Macedonian community, or students who have other plans for how they want to develop this particular international interest, please do let us know. So that's by way of background. Tonight, though, I'm going to get out of your way because, in her own words, we have tonight the scholar who, if for many North Americans, wrote the book on Macedonia. Christina Kramer, among her other accomplishments, while in a long career at the University of Toronto, authored the main textbook on learning Macedonian, which is used across North America and I think beyond. Correct? Yeah. Every continent. Okay. She is also alongside that, she has developed a side gig as a literary translator over recent years, including translating some very contemporary authors, including actually I don't have it here, so who's the most recent author?
Byli Ekranowski, Zabin Bolshevik, Zoltan Chmielewski, and this.
Yeah. So she doesn't sleep a lot, as you can tell. And one of the things we were just talking about yesterday is this younger generation of Macedonian authors are really building reputation and visibility across Europe and hopefully into North America as well. And a lot of that is the quality and the visibility of the translations that makes that work accessible to other readers. And if that weren't enough, Christina is also working on a book right now, and that's what this talk comes from, where she is tracing the history of Skopje through its representations in postcards from the late 19th century to the present. So we're not going to obviously hear the whole book because Professor Kramer is a disciplined speaker and has said we're going to speak for 45 to 50 minutes, and then we'll have hopefully some time for questions and discussion afterwards. But for now, please join me in welcoming Professor Kramer.
So first I'm going to test the mic. Can you hear me? Those of you in the back? Yes? Nod? Those of you in the front? Thank you. And thank those of you who I saw last night for coming again. I didn't scare you off last night. So that is a special pleasure. So some of you in the room know me. I'm mainly a linguist. And a funny thing happened on the way of being a linguist. I became obsessed with postcards. And that's what I'm going to talk about today. And people who have read the manuscript have described it as a love letter to Skopje, which has become a city that I've visited for over 50 years, and not quite 50 years, but certainly well over 40 years, and is my second city. So I'm going to be talking about Skopje today, with my book title is Reading Postcards, Changing Viewpoints, Skopje, 1900 to 2019. It, of course, gives me tremendous pleasure to be hosted here in Tempe, presenting the Mary Choncoff Lecture about a city that is far from Tempe, yet one that Tempe holds close. Skopje became the sister city of Tempe in 1971. At that same time, Tempe became the brother city, as Macedonians would say, of Skopje. There are many of us in this room, myself included, who have brothers and sisters that are far away from us. But our love transcends the borders that separate us. On that distant day when they became sibling cities, on the 12th of July, 1971, the Arizona Republic reported, Governor Jack Williams welcomed the delegation with these words, "We have much in common. We inhabit the same earth." Williams reminded his audience that we all have common aspirations as old as man, and I would add woman, himself or herself, human dignity, and the love of freedom. In closing, he said, may this acceptance of sisterhood between the great city of Skopje in then Yugoslavia and Tempe, Arizona, USA, signal a step forward in man's humanity for man and in our eternal quest for understanding and peace. It is in this spirit that I have the honor of speaking to you in Tempe about your sister city, Skopje, and on an old technology of communication and connection, the postcard. But before I dive in, I've timed this talk. If I get carried away with the slides, it's going to take me 48 minutes, and if I don't, it will be 42. So brace yourself for like 45 minutes. There's going to be a lot of detail. You're going to be looking at a lot of images. There is not a test. So it's just to really kind of give you an idea of history and the way it's captured in the postcards. And if you need me to go back to an image at the end, I'll be happy to do so. But before I begin, I would like to just take a moment of silence for the 59 young lives that were lost a week or so ago in the town of Choncoff, which is, today we're going to be talking about a number of other tragedies that fell the city of Skopje, and this is a big one. So, postcards. I began collecting postcards as a teenager, and by the time I graduated college and I was gathering up my things to be taken home, I had a pillowcase filled with postcards. After that, relatives, friends, and friends' friends began sending me postcards from around the world, mostly greetings from postcards, which were my particular favorite, and I now have hundreds of them from the North Pole to Argentina and Tasmania in more than a dozen languages. I've been traveling to Skopje to do research in the late 1970s, and each trip included sending postcards back home. Postcards tell us things, and they raise questions. Imagine for a moment that you found this postcard in a drawer at home. You might wonder what that building is. And upon learning that it's the Grady Gamage Memorial Auditorium, you might wonder who it was named for, and why Frank Lloyd ended up building it here. And when you turn the card over and it's written in German by somebody who is in Phoenix, where it's very hot, you might start to wonder who was this guy who was in Phoenix in the 1990s sending this postcard back home to Germany. And then in the pile you find the second postcard, and then you start networking. Well, wait a minute, what is the positionality of this building in the context of ASU? And all of a sudden, you've launched yourself down the rabbit hole of collecting postcards at ASU and asking questions of the front and the back and the stamp and the writer. So you can see how my postcard collection went a little crazy. I kind of keep my eye out for postcards. In 2011, I began to notice postcards circulating in Skopje in unusual ways. I went to a flute concert in the Skopje City Museum, and I actually went to that concert with Johan Starova, those of you who were there last night. And at the entry, there was a poster board filled with old Skopje postcards. That same trip, in a restaurant on the square, images from old postcards had been turned into restaurant placemats. At the airport, I had noticed framed images of old Skopje postcards. The more I looked, the more I realized that there had been a different Skopje, and one that I knew little about. But it was one that was at this point in time re-emerging in the public imagination. The announcement of the Skopje 2014 project, which was a major rebuilding of the city, had been announced several years before with a computer-generated video of a radically changed city. This apparently had sparked a growing nostalgia for a Skopje that had existed prior to the catastrophic 1963 earthquake, and for new development after a decade or more of economic stagnation. It turns out that there were actually several pasts I was to learn about before the new post-2014 was to come into focus and pave over the Skopjes that had been before. Not only do I go to Skopje, but I walk around Skopje. And I have been walking around Skopje for 50 years. John A. Jackal connects the postcard to the gaze of the flaneur who walks the city, collecting and interpreting the succession of urban images. But here, in his words, the viewer of the postcard becomes the spectator, and the focus is no longer on people in the landscape, but the city itself, which becomes the spectacle. The postcard photographers and the editors of the postcards create that spectacle. They direct our view through compositional techniques of frame, what's in the picture, sightline, what is the angle and where is our view directed, and the focal point. So if I draw a line, we are right back at the camera back there, and David is our focal point, And we've created a focus of this room that might be not on the speaker, but on the recording of the talk. So what we're going to talk about or what we're going to see is designed by the postcard photographer and editor to highlight parts of the city. In Skopje, the river Vardar, the central square, the old stone bridge, the marketplace or Charcia, and the Kale fortress, the surrounding mountains, provide interesting sightlines directing the viewer's gaze towards focal points of interest, and by looking north to the old Ottoman-era city or south to the more modern center, photographers show us the city from different vantage points, narrating the city from different historical and ethnic, if you will, points of view. Many early postcards were produced abroad, and the photographs and captions, particularly in the early years of the 20th century, reflected power relations between the viewer and the viewed, often presenting Skopje as what Maria Todorova would say, a repository of negative characteristics against which a positive and self-congratulatory image of the European and the West has been constructed. So there were many photographs like this that circulated during the end of the Ottoman era of poverty, of people in decorative costume, of Rome, so of course this says the Gypsy Quarter, the marketplace. Let me just find my place here again. So postcards of Skopje, ever since the earliest years of postcard production, particularly those produced outside of Macedonia, have reflected this fascination with the other side of Europe, often focusing on the exotic, the ruins, the rough edges of the city. As more postcards began to be produced locally, postcards began to tell different stories, aligning sightlines with perceived local narratives of self-identity, achievement, and a turn to a more European present, rarely considering Skopje's ethnic minorities as the main narrative. As well, successive governments and occupiers harnessed the widespread reach of postcards as a communication vehicle to spread images and brand the city as Serbian, Bulgarian, Yugoslav, Macedonian, with changes to the named landscape and the languages used on the cards themselves. Now, once you open up the cupboard and say, postcard studies, the amount and variety of things that tumble out of that cupboard is astounding. People have written about postcards in every possible way you can imagine. And the reason is that you can do all these different studies on postcards due to the sheer scope of archives that you're able to assemble. By the 1880s, new printing technologies had led to the inexpensive reproduction of photographs so that one full side of a postcard could carry an illustration. The postcard became a widespread means of rapid communication. Literally, like in England, postcards were sent in the morning and received in the afternoon. And not only did they circulate, they became items that were prized by collectors. Literally billions of postcards were sent and billions were collected. And when I say billions, there were already billions in circulation by 1910. So the postcard was like the email is today. It was just rapid, it was easy, and out they went. Skopje became a subject for hundreds upon hundreds of postcards because the golden age of postcards, that turn of the century, this pivotal moment in postal history, was also a pivotal moment in the life of the city. Postcards began to circulate in the southern Balkans at the end of the 19th century, just before the collapse of the Ottoman Empire, when new borders were being proposed and ultimately redrawn. The earliest postcards featuring Macedonia and Skopje date from the turn of the 19th and 20th centuries, just a few years after the development of postcards in Germany in the 1860s. The postcard era documented change across the 20th and 21st centuries, but the postcard era has pretty much come to an end. But not before the new postcard montages captured the complete change in the city brought about by the Skopje 14 project. So what I'm going to do here this evening is, through a series of images, I'm going to telescope across these 100 years to trace the movements of people, the shifts in language policies, and the three great transformations of Skopje's built space since 1900. One after the end of the Ottoman Empire and the founding of the Kingdom of Serbs, Croats, and Slovenes. The second after the massive earthquake of 1963, creating a new open city with brutalist and modernist architecture. And most recently, the hyper-nationalist, neo-Baroque rebuilding of 2014. But before we do that, some of you in this room are from Skopje, many of you in this room have been to Skopje, but some of you in this room may have never really thought about Skopje until yesterday. So let's just take a quick look at creating the borders of the modern state Republic of North Macedonia and locating what I call the city of many names, Turkish, Serbian, Serbo-Croatian, whatever, Skopje, Bulgarian, Skopje, Macedonian, Skopje, written in multiple different alphabets, but this is what we're going to do here. Skopje's origins date back to antiquity. The original Roman city of Skopje was located about 5 kilometers from the present city, but it was destroyed by an earthquake in 518. And over the course of a century, a new city developed on the site of the Kala fortress on the banks of the Vardar River, the site of the contemporary city. Over the course of centuries, the city found itself within different empires whose borders overlapped, creating competing historical claims to the city. Did it belong to the Greek Empire, the Serbian Empire, the Bulgarian Empire? But today, I'm not going to give you all that history. We're going to go to the 19th century, when the Balkan states were still largely under Austro-Hungarian in the blue or Ottoman red control. So Skopje, we'll see on other maps, it's going to be right about here. It's well in Ottoman territories. In March of 1878, the Russo-Turkish Wars, Russia and Turkey signed the Treaty of San Stefano, which you see over here. It recognized the independence from the Ottoman Empire of Romania, Serbia, and Montenegro. It gave autonomy to Bosnia and Herzegovina. But significantly for the history of Skopje, it created a greater Bulgaria, which is this red, which included most of the Macedonian territories. And here is labeled on the map, Uskop. This treaty lasted only several months before Russia was compelled by Austro-Hungary and Britain to sign the Treaty of Berlin in July of that same year, July of 1878. And so here we see the much reduced Bulgaria, and we see that these territories have been returned back to the Ottoman Empire. So now Uskop is back in the Ottoman territories. In 1899, the only major area remaining in European Turkey was this central zone of which Macedonia fits. And here we see Uskop in the green territory. Bulgaria is yellow, Romania is purple, here's Serbia in orange, Montenegro in pink, Bosnia in purple, Albania is going to be carved out of here, and Greece is just pretty much the Peloponnesus down there, a little bit to the north. In 1912, Serbia, Bulgaria, Montenegro, and Greece united to drive the Ottomans largely out of these Balkan territories. And then in 1913, they fought amongst themselves for the spoils. So here are the Balkan states following the Treaty of Bucharest in 1913. Serbia was awarded this area. This area here is going to ultimately become today's Republic of North Macedonia. So it's this area here. Greece almost doubled in size, getting what are known as the Aegean Macedonian territories. Bulgaria received this slice on its western border, known as Period Macedonia. So that is our situation at the turn of the century, 1913. So, before we go back to the Ottoman end of the city of Skopje, I just want to continue forward so you can see here is Skopje within the Federated Yugoslavia. And then here is Skopje located on a map of what a map of the Republic of North Macedonia looks like today. So we're talking just over 100 years, and Skopje has been relocated and on all these different maps. All right. So we're back to the Ottoman city of Skopje. The Ottoman city of Skopje, or Skopje, had for 5 centuries developed on the north bank of the Vardar River. And here's our Vardar River, below the Kale fortress. So it kind of spread out along the north bank of the river. Many of the most significant architectural monuments on the north bank were built in the 15th century. The Ottoman city architecture isn't on the grid pattern like we know so well here, like in Tempe, where the streets are lined up. It was built on a pattern that Stefan Bujarovsky calls triads, mosques, Turkish baths, and inns that demarcated different neighborhoods. And its minarets, baths, markets, small shops, the stone bridge across the Vardar, the fortress, and the city's diverse population all provided exotic views for the postcard readers who received postcards produced in Germany, France, Austria, Italy, Switzerland, Serbia, Hungary, and other European locales, where the postcards then traveled in the first decades of the 20th century. The development of the South Bank, however, began to accelerate at the end of the 19th century with the coming of the railroad and the location of the railroad station on that bank. So here is the railroad station, here's Mount Vodno, and here's the train station on the South Bank. The city of Skopje had been slowly increasing in size after its nadir in the 17th century, when in 1689, the retreating Austrian army had sacked the city and then ordered it to be burned by General Silvio Piccolomini. The urban population had sunk to approximately 6,000 people. Bujarovsky again notes that after the burning of the city of Skopje found itself outside the main currents of Balkan history for the next 200 years. It was just a backwater of the Ottoman Empire. But now, with the coming of the rail line, the city that had begun on the north bank atop the fortress and had over the centuries cascaded from its height, began to grow, stretching out along the south bank, slowly reaching Mount Vodno to the south. In this next slide, hello, there we go. Here's a close-up of here's a close-up of the south bank. There was largely Ottoman cemeteries. There were chief leaps. There were lots of agricultural fields. There were a couple churches. There's a mosque that we're going to look at. So this is an early 20th century Ottoman era postcard where we see the Vardar bifurcating the city, and we see the stone bridge which dates from the Ottoman era, and it's connecting the north bank to the south. And what we're looking at here is from atop the Kale fortress, looking across the historic Jewish cemetery. And that's what it becomes in that terrible turn of fate. Jewish quarter. Looking across, and right at the edge of the bridge, we see this, the Burmali, or spiral mosque. As the Ottoman era was nearing collapse, the Sultan, who had become Sultan only in 1909, made his first trip to Skopje, a stop en route to Kosovo. The Sultan arrived at the Skopje train station, and for his visit, a new road was laid following a straight line from the train station to the Burmali Mosque, then across the bridge to the Kale and beyond. So this is what it looked like before, and for the arrival of the Sultan, this road gets built from the train station, straight shot to the Burmali Mosque and across the bridge. So I've done something fancy, so now you can see it on this map. Now you see it, now you don't. That's the bridge. I know, special effects. I know. That's the high-tech part of my talk. So in the following slides, we're going to look at a telescoped history of several sites on the north and south banks, kind of looking at a site and fanning out the postcards. So you can see sort of its progression over history. We're going to begin at the train station, and then we're going to walk along the new street. Mayan first built in 1873. A new station is built in 1938. The new station gets bombed by the Germans in 1941. It gets damaged in the flood of 1962, and it collapses in the earthquake of 1963, which then the old station becomes the Museum of the City of Skopje. But we'll get to that. So the train station, here's our original train station. This train station at the end of the street was to become one of the most central images in the city. I'm not going to tell you about all the things that are written on the back of the postcards, but I'm including some of the messages so you get a sense of the materiality of looking at postcards and the wonderful voyeuristic sense we get of being able to read what people wrote. So he writes, "Since last night I have found myself in the old capital of ancient Serbia," looking back in his message to the medieval empire of Stefan Dusan, when Skopje became a Serbian capital of an empire. And he did the wonderful thing when a postcard writer communicates with the postcard by labeling things on the front. And he's written here in French, "Où j'ai couché," this is where I slept. So just to give you a sense of what these look like. On the right here, during the era of the first Yugoslavia, formerly the Kingdom of Serbs, Croats, and Slovenes, under King Alexander, the old train station was replaced by this grand new station, with construction beginning in 1937, a time which saw growth and a lot of new building across the city, with large building projects on both the north and south banks. For example, the Ibn Paiko building, for those of you who know, it was built at the same time. Construction on this train station lasted 3 years, but on the 6th of April 1941, the new station was hit by German airstrikes. The building was repaired, and it functioned as the main train station until 1963. But it had been weakened by the airstrike and the floods of 1962. On the 26th of July, at 5:17 a.m., a massive earthquake struck the city, with its epicenter right at the heart of the city. The earthquake lasted about 17 seconds, and in those moments, more than 1,000 people died, and more than 80% of the urban-built structures collapsed. This collapsed train station went on to become a symbol of the city of hope, and was turned into the Skopje City Museum. A new station designed by the Japanese architect Kenzo Tange, who was the winner of the post-earthquake development plan, was moved to the east side of the city, opening in 1981. But perhaps due to its minimalist, brutalist design and location away from the city center, it rarely appears as the subject of postcards. Though I was in Skopje when it opened to great fanfare. So now we're going to walk along the main street. So the main street, what we're going to look at here is how this street, which didn't look like much in the beginning, but hey, it was built for the Sultan. So this must be the most important street. So it is the street that gets renamed by every conqueror. So it starts first as Yeni Cadde, the new street for the Sultan. It gets flooded in 1916. And during World War I, Bulgarians occupied the city, and they named the street for Tsar Ferdinand of Bulgaria. Then by 1920, with the Kingdom of Serbs, Croats, and Slovenes, which will become the first Yugoslavia, it is renamed King Peter Street. Then in 1941, Bulgaria occupies the city again during World War II, and it becomes Tsar Boris Street. What was good for the father was good for the son, apparently. In 1944, after World War II, on the creation of Yugoslavia and the Federated Republic of Macedonia, it becomes Marshal Tito Street. And then in 1991, with Macedonia's independence, it becomes Macedonia Street. So let's have a look. In this German postcard from the early 20th century, its caption is underspecified. It's called A Street in Skopje, Straße in Skopje. The fact that it lacks specificity is typical of a lot of postcards that were produced by external producers of postcards for external recipients. Because the person who took the picture and the one who receives it really doesn't care anything about what the street is. So it's these localities are treated with broad generalizations. There is nothing on this card that tells you that not only is this a new street, this was a new street built for the Sultan right at the end of the Ottoman Empire. And it doesn't point out any of the special features of the street. For example, this unassuming Catholic church on the main street, which becomes the parish church of Gonja Boyajiu, who becomes Mother Teresa. So that is Mother Teresa's church, and it too will be lost in the 1963 earthquake. The second postcard shows the same street a few years later, during Bulgaria's occupation of the city in 1916. The postcard, I've been labeling the captions in what language they are so you can see the changing language policies, but I'm not going to really have a lot of time to talk about this here. The caption of this postcard is in Bulgarian and German because it was intended for troops fighting in Macedonia during this period. The Sultan's new street is named Tsar Ferdinand, and the building there on the right with the stripes is Skopje's first grand hotel labeled in Bulgarian. The street continued to develop and to change names. By 1923, following the establishment of the kingdoms of Serbs and Croats, it's renamed King Peter Street, and the city is now in its Cyrillic Serbian form, Skopje. And though you can't see it in the postcard, there is rising literacy in the city, and all the stores now actually carry signs in Serbian or French. 20 years later, we're back at war. The Bulgarians occupy the city. The city is now labeled in its Bulgarian Cyrillic form, Skopje, and the city is now called the Street of Tsar Boris. So already in these few postcards, we see how language policies and renaming show competing Bulgarian and Serbian interests and how those are reflected in the circulation of postcards through captions and renaming. When in 1944 Macedonian was declared the official language of the Socialist Republic, everything, the streets, the quays, the main streets are renamed once again, and the main street becomes Marshal Tito Street. So as we're looking north on Marshal Tito Street, I just want you to have a look here. This is the Bristol Hotel. It's still there in Skopje. And if you just take a look at those curved windows, a lot of the people passing through Skopje, by the way, were soldiers throughout the decades. And I thought you might like to know what this soldier sent home. I'm writing to you from Skopje, where I've come to the headquarters. I got screwed over again. But with work and discipline, I got by all right. So right now, it's so cold that during work hours, we almost don't have heat. In the afternoon, we sleep. A soldier's life. So, so pay attention to the Bristol Hotel. And I took this 3 weeks ago. And now we're looking north. And here you can see the Hotel Bristol. And it's packed. Why is this a photograph and not a postcard? Well, not only are there fewer and fewer postcards to be bought, but it's become really difficult, if not actually impossible, to find postcards of the main street, which is now crammed with the Mother Teresa Memorial Museum, the rebuild of the Cathedral of St. Constantine and Elena over there on the right, and newly reclad buildings in their new Baroque redressings. Why? Because postcard attention has moved on to the square, where the square is now where the action has moved. So we are going to leave the main street and we are going to make our way to the square, which was going to become one of the largest urban squares in the Balkans, the most contested space in the city, the epicenter of conflicting views of the city, and the epicenter of the earthquake. This is, by the way, scenes of the train station today, and, well, the train station before they cut down all the trees to make way for yet another building crammed onto the street. And here we can see with all the trees are gone, there's the Bristol Hotel. But I digress. The square. So, quick timeline. 1911, we see the beginnings of the square when that road connects up to the Burmali Mosque. In 1916, it's named Kaiser Wilhelm Square. 1920, it's King Peter Square. In 1941, the Bulgarians very creatively call it the square. Then we have Marshal Tito Square and then Macedonia Square. So here we go. So this postcard of 1916, during World War I, the postcard labels it in German and Bulgarian, Kaiser Wilhelm Square. We also see this liminal moment when the Ottoman name Skopje is beginning to share the front of the postcard with some Slavic form. So that in just a few years after this postcard was sent, the name Skopje is going to vanish from the postcard record. Though it doesn't say it, I suspect what's happening in this picture is we're seeing the building of the road for the Tsar's arrival. But history marches on. The Kingdom of Serbs, Croats, and Slovenes brought with it a plan to, first of all, they renamed the square, surprise, King Peter Square, and we begin to see a beginning of bi-alphabetism in the postcards, of labeling it in only one language, but in Cyrillic and in Latinx, in Cyrillic and Latin letters. But this postcard also shows some other plan the Serbs had, which was to de-Ottomanize the square and to create a new European-style city center. This break with the city's past is encapsulated in the entwined histories of the Burmali spiral mosque that you saw a few moments ago by the bridge, and the Officers' Club, and the ways in which postcard views begin to be layered, showing the same sightlines but different views. In this postcard, we can just make out down here this flat area. That was the Burmali Mosque, which had stood there for 500 years. Shortly after the founding of the Kingdom of Serbs, Croats, and Slovenes, it is leveled. So, I have about 10 minutes to go. You ready? Here we go. The Burmali Mosque and the Officers' Club. The mosque gets built in 1495. It's one of the endpoints for the arrival of the Tsar. In 1925, it's destroyed by Serbs wanting to build a new city, and the columns are carried off to the city park. The Officers' Club starts being built in 1925 to 29. It collapses in the 1963 earthquake, and it has a revival in 2014. The Burmali Mosque was an incredibly popular image for postcard producers. It brings together the river, the bridge, and Ottoman architecture in ways that was very captivating. And the river has a bit of a bend in it. So the Burmali Mosque at the foot of the bridge, hundreds of postcards. Kumbarji Bagojevic notes that the significance of this mosque is in part due to its location on the south bank of the river. It was the first mosque built on that bank, and it stood from the end of the 15th to the beginning of the 20th centuries. The Serbs demolished the Burmali Mosque, and they built the Officers' Club that you can see on the right here. It opened in 1929, and it became the center for elegant events, a center for the new elites, and an iconic image of the city, replacing the mosque. After World War II, it was renamed Dom Juna, the house of the Yugoslav National Army. It was the focal point of hundreds of postcards from every possible viewpoint. However, like the train station, it collapsed in the 1963 earthquake, less than 35 years after its completion. And with it collapsed the entwined histories of the mosque and the club. The reverberations of that collapse would reemerge in post-2014 Skopje when a dispute broke out what to build at the bend in the river by the bridge. Some proposed a church should belong there, perhaps the Cathedral of Saints Constantine and Elena, which had never stood there but which had been further down the river. Albanians suggested that the Burmali Mosque should be rebuilt. After all, it had been there for 500 years. It then drove counter-arguments that before the Burmali Mosque, 600 years ago, there was a church of Sveta Nikola, and that's what should be there. Others called for an absolute moratorium on any building on the square, least of all anything religious. In the end, a new version of the Officers' Club is being constructed. So here, we see the train station and its demolition. I've called this Old Skopje revival. We begin to see postcards that recycle old buildings and old images. Here we have the old square, and here my arrow is pointing to the start of the reconstruction of the Officers' Club, which you can see here in my picture from a few weeks ago. To just take you back, There it is, and presto changeo, here it is again. There is a writer who writes a really wonderful architectural blog about Skopje, and he suggests that at a different time in history, some of the historic buildings in Skopje would have been restored and rebuilt. The earthquake took place in 1963. That was the year, those were the years of so-called urban renewal, AKA hollowing out of city centers here. It was a period of forward-looking, we're gonna get rid of the old, we're gonna build the new. And so Skopje was a different city after the earthquake. It was looking forward, it was expanding, it was implementing a major redesign of the city, and it brought in I would say some of the most beautiful and interesting brutalist buildings and modernist buildings to this small capital. The current rebuilding is to this blogger a mere imitation and a tasteless reproduction. I will leave that to you. As for the Bormeli Mosque, when the mosque was demolished, the columns were hauled off to the city park. When new postcards of Skopje were issued right after the establishment of the Macedonian Socialist Republic and the recognition of Macedonian as the standard language, one of the very first Macedonian postcards with captions in Macedonia is this postcard of the city park, with the columns from the Bormeli Mosque unlabeled, with lanterns affixed to their tops, and the capitals that sat on the top of those columns were inverted and turned into flower pots. In the 2014 plan, actually in 2010, the artist Ivan Ivanovsky created what he calls bird people, two sculptures mounted atop the columns. Kumarji Boyajievich remarked, they should be removed out of respect for Ottoman architecture, particularly since these are human forms which are not recognized in Ottoman art and Ottoman architecture. I would like to point out 3 weeks ago, they're still there. So that's the history of what happened on that site on the square. But there was a building opposite on the edge of the square. It has a similar fate to the Officers Club, but there's a surprise twist. A national bank was erected opposite the Officers Club in 1931. In 1942, Bulgaria renames it. They pull the letters off and they rename it the Bulgarian National Bank, and it's hung with a large swastika. In 1955, it now is the Yugoslav National Bank, and it is mounted with a hammer and sickle and a red star. It gets damaged in the earthquake and subsequently demolished, and in 2011, that particular parcel of land becomes the home of the Macedonian Telecom Unit. So, up in the top corner here, we see the city is recalled Skopje. We're in 1941. The swastika is a little hard to see. This postcard is very popular. You can find many copies of it online. Over here, a lesser known 1957 postcard. I wanted to say a little more about Bulgarians during the war, but for time, I'm just going to move on. So this bank building, for some reason, became the backdrop for various different ideologies. Following the war, these new ideologies became reflected in the city and the square under the leadership of Marshal Tito. The square was renamed Marshal Tito. The buildings on the square were hung with banners of Tito. Postcards, we can see postcards displaying tributes to the 50th anniversary of the October Revolution. And in this late 50s card, we see the hammer and sickle and the red star. In the 1963 earthquake, the bank didn't collapse, but it was deemed uninhabitable, and it was subsequently demolished. So this postcard from the 1960s, showed right before the earthquake, shows the square with the two buildings facing one another. This image becomes what I call the dreamscape of just prior to the 2014 rebuild of Skopje. Somebody shockingly writes, it's hellishly hot in Skopje, but we're surviving. It's always hellishly hot in Skopje, except when you're a soldier and you're freezing. I don't know. But when I first saw Skopje, it looked more like this. There wasn't the street in the middle, but it was a wide open space with this huge open pedestrian area and a large park. When I first went to Skopje, I knew nothing of Kenzo Tanga. I knew nothing about his plan to rebuild the city. I didn't know that he envisioned a square on each side, uniting the north and south on either side of the bridge. But due to economic stagnation and lack of political will, only parts of the Kenzo Tanga plan were actually actualized. Postcards of the 1970s and 80s tended to feature photo montage, new buildings like the post office building, the city mall, the opera house. In this slide, we see the modern building of the post office complex, where it's kind of visually forming the building that you see at the bend in the river, where we first had the mosque, then we had the officers' club, and now a little further down the quay, we have the post office building. After independence in 1991, the years of building stagnation eventually turned into this building frenzy, where new deals were made and investigated. There is no time now to talk here about corruption and the 2014 project, but we're going to return a moment to the National Bank that was demolished after the 1963 earthquake. The parcel of land at the edge of the square where the bank had been was sold through, shall we call them, sketchy deals, and the construction of the Macedonian telecom building and the sale of telecommunications in Skopje resulted in many claims of deal-making with Hungary and German telecommunications companies. When I returned to Skopje after viewing literally hundreds and hundreds of postcards, and I saw again the glass telecom building right there, it was like I was seeing a ghost. Because I understood for the first time that what I was seeing was the shadow of the bank.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I know. It's kind of amazing, right? It's also amazing because it was built before the Neo-Baroque. So we can't leave the square without pausing for a moment about the controversial fountain in the middle of it, the warrior on the horse, or Alexander the Great, depending on whether the postcard was produced and printed before or after the Prespa Accord of 2019, which requires clarification in Article 6 of the Accord of references to Macedonia as either referring to the ancients or the modern Slavs. This, however, is worthy of a dissertation, and it has been worthy of many dissertations, various books, theses, and articles. We are just going to pause and look at the statue before we go to the north side of the building and note that this card was sent to the Philippines with the message, "Hey Cindy, dear Cindy, warm greetings from Macedonia. This unofficially is Alexander the Great." So it turns out it doesn't matter what you labeled it on the card. AKA the Macedonian, and the fountain is at the center of Skopje. At night, the fountain has a light show, and it's one of the most photographed places in the city. Best wishes, Goran. For those of you who go to Skopje often, what's shocking is how old this postcard looks, because all these trees have all been cut down. Everything that you see here has been built up. You actually can't see this hillside anymore. It's all built up. So what looks like a modern postcard now looks really dated. So we're going to quickly head to the north bank. And I think I'm going to skip talking about the bridge. I'm just going to zoom on. Here's the bridge. Here's some interesting old pictures of the bridge connecting the two cities. What's important about the bridge is that the bridge was viewed as the symbol of the city because it connected the old city on the north with the new city on the south. And old city on the north basically is undercurrent for the Ottoman history and the Muslim present of the city. And the North Bank is the Orthodox, Christian, European, and the bridge is the symbol of unity between them. So a lot of montage postcards in the 70s and 80s actually played with the bridge as a symbol of brotherhood and unity, putting images of North Bank and South Bank and North Bank divided by the bridge, or images of Orthodox Christianity uniting with images of mosques and other Ottoman era photography. New images of the bridge could care less about connecting the left bank and the right bank. It could care less about connecting Muslim and Christian. It is just a hodgepodge of all this new construction, and you'll notice the bridge doesn't look like it's connecting anything. And the North Bank is now blockaded by a wall of buildings, so you can't see from a distance any of the mosques or any of the modernist buildings that have been put in their place. The old North Bank, however, is cast to people as the exotica of Skopje. So when students go, when I go, you want to cross over to the north, so you can go through the Charchia with its little winding streets and stores, the Ottoman flavor of smelling chivap, cooking in the markets. You make your way to the Beit Pazar, and it allows you that moment of oriental satiation, of feeling like you've gone somewhere far away. And a postcard from the 1970s, a Serbian writes to her boyfriend at home, mosques and a James Bond atmosphere, that's Skopje for you. And she's chosen the bridge leading off to the North Bank. So very briefly, the North Bank. New identities and new languages are being written into the landscape. I'm sorry, I need to back up here, because I want you to see these pictures. The North Bank has its own present. So it's not as if this was frozen in time like Brigadoon. New buildings have been built within the Ottoman streets of the North Bank. We can see in this postcard where apartment towers began being built and interspersed. We're going to see, again, these new buildings, even Pico buildings from the 30s, the 40s, the 50s, and modern buildings. So the North Bank is not frozen in time. And yet, it still plays into that other Europe fantasy in the designers of postcards. In this Magic Lights of Macedonia series, we have the Mustafa Pasha Mosque, the Magic Lights of Macedonia, and here perhaps not only in a tip of the hat to the old Ottoman era postcards, but also the brotherhood and unity. If you look carefully, the lights are all in this dreamscape of the North Bank. But on the very far right, we have the minaret of Mustafa Pasha, and on the very left, we have the millennial cross on the top of Volga. Madness. So, very quickly, we have to talk about Albania. New identities and new languages are being written into the postcard landscape. In the wake of the 2001 Ohrid's Accords, which stated that Macedonia's multi-ethnic character had to be preserved and reflected in public life, this statue of the Albanian patriot Skenderbeg was placed on the North Bank, and its image became the first postcard image connecting Albanians in Skopje with their own medieval past to circulate as a postcard. Skenderbeg was a 15th century Albanian hero famed for his resistance against Turkish invasions and is the most revered Albanian national history. Weirdly, however, the postcard provides no explanation of who Skenderbeg is. It doesn't comment on the fact that somebody has tucked an Albanian flag into Skenderbeg's arm that's in the photograph, but you can't see it very well here. And it doesn't comment on the double-headed eagle. It's just this picture with no comment. Because it was the first explicitly Albanian-focused postcard, but it was not the last. In 2009, the EMS Energy Company produced a postcard. There must be one in Macedonian somewhere, but I can't find it. They took this old postcard of the Ottoman era bridge, and they manipulated it to turn it into a night postcard of Skopje, and Skopje at night is a motif of postcards, and it's labeled in Albanian, Shkupi Natin, Skopje at night, 1909. So it not only places Albanians in the city today, but it projects back placing Albanians in the city at the beginning of the 20th century. The statue of Skenderbeg has since been moved to a much higher pedestal, and it now stands at the entry to a new Albanian square, Skenderbeg Square, that has taken form on the North Bank, sort of that memory of the Kenzo Tanga plan of a square on the north and a square on the south. The square is located just over the road that cuts between the Vardar River and the Old Market. These sheltering arches line the edge of the square, And behind, in the upper part, we have a panoramic view of the North Bank. And let me make sure I get them. So what we see here is the square building of Kapan Han, which is a 15th century inn, recognizable by its square red roof. To its left, we see the National Gallery, which is housed in the Turkish bath, Çifte Hamam. In the center is Isaac Beg Mosque. Beyond that, up on the hill, we see Mustafa Pasha Mosque, which used to be dominant view anywhere in the city. Between them on the right, oh my God, I've got a little laser thingy. That modern building is a very modernist structure. It's the the National Museum of Macedonia that was built in the 1970s. And way over here, way over there where you can barely see it, is the center square on the South Bank. So this postcard recenters the narrative of the city, where the center is the north and not the south, interestingly enough. So my introduction to the material postcard record, which largely, I admit, focused on the South Bank, I hope shows you this complex history of this city and the movement of different people through the city, the reflection of different political ideologies, languages, and beliefs. The postcard archive underlines the fact that language and urban change reflect migration, travel, shifting governments, and people in contact. Urban cosmopolitanism is also about communication, history, and contact. Recent policies in Macedonia, and I might add elsewhere, that focused on changing the history of urbanism, socialism, and cosmopolitanism is about erasure. My postcard project is an attempt in the spirit of multilingualism and multiculturalism that is carried in the very structures of the city itself and the languages spoken there to reclaim and trace the human contact and complex histories of the city's medieval, Ottoman, and socialist pasts. I'm going to show you my last postcard, but I forgot to just read one comment by one. I've told you that mainly the postcards are written by soldiers, tourists, travelers, but they're also written by academics who go to Skopje conferences. And this postcard, the person has written, "Hi, whoa, get back here. Hey, whoa, good heavens." Well, what it says is, "Hi, you're missing some really interesting papers." That's a dubitative. Interesting papers. But I just thought you'd like to see. There we go. "You're missing some really interesting papers." That is a dubitative. So we also have some very famous Slavic linguists' postcards have ended up, unbeknownst to them, in my collection. Including from the consul general who heard the Sultan on Kosovo Field that day. So I'm going to end with this postcard. This is one of the last postcards I bought in Skopje, and it's really unusual. It shows an aerial view that extends out to include both banks of the Vardar River, the south and the north. This inclusive view that pulls together all the pieces of Skopje's history into one single frame is the challenge that Skopje faces. But as postcards disappear, the postcard archive is not going to be the one telling that story. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. I'm going to let you field your own questions.
I'm going to field my own questions.
If that's all right. I would just
wait, no, please.
I would just observe that some people might not know what dubitative means. But I'll leave that to you to unfold or not.
I will unfold very quickly. So the wonderful thing about learning other languages is they do things that our language doesn't. And sometimes languages have things that you go, God, I wish our language had that. Macedonian uses a particular verb form to cast doubt on the veracity of the comment. So, for example, you, student, says, "Oh my God, I didn't know that there was a talk tonight." And your friend says, "Yeah, you didn't know." In English, we'd say, "as if." But in Macedonian, they can do it with a verb form. So, the person writes in English, I heard some really interesting papers, but in Macedonian you could do that with a verb form, and that person wouldn't need the air quotes, they just know. Isn't that awesome? Yes.
You mentioned something about postcard archive.
Yep.
So, what are you going to do with the postcard?
Ah.
Library,
The line
museum?
forms to the left. So I have an archive now of about 800 postcards. And the University of Toronto says that they would house the collection. And I'm torn because the postcard collection will be beautifully housed in the rare book. It will get wonderful treatment. It will be available to any scholar going there. If I give it to the Museum of the City of Skopje, the postcards go home. And they can't afford the collection that I put together. However, I have seen the state of their collection. And so I'm torn. Do I want them? I mean, in a perfect world, I would actually have money and I would digitize it. And then everybody could have it. But I am a retired person. I am not going to spend my last years digitizing all these pictures on the front and the back and whatever. I don't know. So that's where it's going. Other questions? If there are no questions, I'll be happy to answer nothing.
You know, for someone who lived for a semester up in Skopje 7, north, it was really still then, this was 35 years ago, about equally Macedonian and Albanian. It wasn't just Albanian, you know, the north and south.
It still isn't.
And it's that's what my question.
Absolutely not. This.
Because you're portraying it almost as Muslim versus Christian,
Because there
north
have
and
been,
south.
I took students to Macedonia, to Skopje, and their parents had told them, do not go into the Charshia. And so there is a perception that it's dangerous, that it's Albanian, that Macedonians don't go there, or contrarily sometimes, it's that the Macedonians are taking over the Charshia because there's too many bars, there's too many, there's too much nightlife. And so I only cast it that way because this is a shortcut, but the city, it's really complicated. A lot of it's what happened after 1963. That when Kenzatanga and this housing plan comes in, the idea was that everyone was going to give up where they lived, and they were going to live in this built housing, and they were going to be provided with housing and services and all these things. And the Muslims living in the North Bank said, we live in communities, we don't live on grid. And we're not going to leave our mosque, and we're not going to leave this quarter. And so they didn't leave. And so a lot of Macedonians then moved into the new housing. A lot of the Muslim population stayed. And so you get these things that are built into the history of who moved where when. But in the Kenzatanga plan, the North Bank was also supposed to be where there were educational and cultural things. And that happened. The university is there. The National Library is not, it's on this side. But the Opera House is over there. The museum got built over there. So there was a plan to make it more integrative. It's just been complicated. And now it's walled off. Yeah, question in the very back.
Well, I lived there for 13 months, and Victor Mizrahi gave me a tour of Skopje based on the Jewish population. And he showed me, when we went to the north side, he showed me the Jewish quarter.
Yep.
He showed me where his house had been. And of course, the major synagogue was destroyed in the earthquake as well. But are there any postcards of that synagogue before it was destroyed?
No. Well, not quite true. Not quite true. You have to know the building. So if we go, if I go if I can get myself back to the very beginning, where I had that postcard overlooking. So When I first went to Skopje, nobody talked about the Jewish quarter. It was the bus station. So you arrive, and there's this big bus station. You get out, and it's paved, and what do I know? It's the bus station. 30 years later, they finally, on the North Bank, had a memorial thing that said, as you look across, this was the site of the Jewish quarter. So here's the Jewish quarter, and in some, it's possible, this might be. So if you go to the Holocaust Museum, they have a stained glass window. That's kind of a funny juxtaposition. But they have a big window, and it looks like they used a famous postcard, and you're overlooking the postcard. I have the postcard, but I don't have it here. And you can see where the synagogue was. There were 2 big synagogues.
Right.
What I learned in my last trip, and I've told some people, that the renaming of streets, so not only was it renamed like Kaiser Wilhelm or Tsar Boris, the streets in the Jewish quarter were renamed. They were renamed things like Hitler Street, so that the Jews were then living on Hitler Street for when they were removed from their houses and brought to the train station that we've talked so much about, and carted away. The streets they were living on had been renamed, just to add final insult.
Thank you.
I'd like to say the pleasure was all mine, but it's not. Thank you for the question.
Yeah, so I'm looking at these wonderful images, and thank you, this was fascinating. And I want to turn it over, I want to know what's on the other side. And the particular thing I want to know is the stamps and the destinations of these things. So where is it going? Because then you get a look at
Well, would
who's
like to know.
going
Yes.
where, at what point in time, and what the flow of people is. It just really,
So I've actually mapped that out.
okay.
And interestingly enough, Bulgarians are in the city in the 1916s and 1940s. And that's when we get the most postcards written on the back in Bulgarian. Grace, I think it was you saying that Bulgarians seem to only like to come to Skopje when they're taking over. Otherwise, I'm not particularly interested. Lots of German during World War I. All of these beautiful postcards, the Vardar cards, this beautiful series of postcards, they're all labeled in Bulgarian and German. None of them, and I have hundreds of them, none of them were sent by Germans or Bulgarians. They were all sent by French soldiers. So I think these cards were produced, and then the tides of war changed. The battle on Skopje Heights in 2018, and all the piles of postcards were then given to the French soldiers who wrote about the victory in Skopje. So massive amounts. There's a French cemetery of the French soldiers who died in World War I. So we see a massive amount of French and German postcards during World War I. We see Bulgarian postcards, as I said, in World War II. We see sporadic cards written in English in the early part of the century, including the Consul General, actually, his postcard. This postcard was sent by the Consul General, was sent to the Consul General in Geneva. It's written in French, saying that we had the opportunity to see the Sultan giving his speech in Kosovo. Luck of the draw, you buy a postcard randomly, and that's what I ended up with. English postcards, once Macedonia becomes independent, we start seeing more bilingual and trilingual descriptions on the back. Because there's more affluence after the war, we see the start of tourism. In 1991, Macedonia becomes independent, and Macedonian language basically disappears from the postcard. Macedonia becomes independent, and we dive into a capitalist transition, tourist-based economy of postcards. The postcards are written, and the captions are in English. We start seeing more English language postcards circulating. The stamps are interesting because they moved from Ottoman era postcards, and during the Sultan's visit, there was a commemorative stamp with an overstamp saying Skopje in honor of his visit. We have stamps that show the King Alexander, and then after his assassination, they have a black border around them. But by the way, if you are interested in the Tsar's visit, the Sultan's visit, the Menaki brothers made a remarkable movie of the arrival of the Sultan in Bitola that you can watch on YouTube. And then you can watch the assassination of King Alexander in Marseille, which is also on YouTube. The stamps also show changing language policy. So there were periods where the stamps, by agreement, would be, say, denomination 4, 8, and 10 dinars would be in Latin script, and 8, 12, and 15 would be in Cyrillic, and that would be announced in the Sluzhba investment. So it would say a new stamp is being issued, and this is the alphabet that it's going to be in. After the Prespa Accords, stamps would begin issuing trilingually, English, Albanian, and Macedonian. So you can trace these things on the stamp, on the overstamp, the frank of the stamp. And it's just fabulously, wonderfully voyeuristic to read these things in all these different languages. Yeah.
How do you
And then you're next.
go about collecting these postcards? Because from like my perspective, it seems like, especially stuff from like decades ago, it feels like these would be prone to like getting lost in history, like people throwing them out, or when someone passes, if they had a collection, maybe family doesn't keep it going, people move, they might forget them. So I was wondering, is there like a secondary market where you go and kind of collect all of this, or
Yes.
kind of the extent of that?
I used to say I'd tell you, but I would have to kill you. But now that I've collected as many postcards as I can tell you, I will be able to tell you this. First of all, remember I said by 1910 there were already billions in circulation? Skopje, there are so many postcards of Skopje because of the wars. And all these wars brought journalists, it brought tourists, it brought soldiers, and all of these entrepreneurs and photographers are out there taking pictures of Skopje. So what happens to the postcards? This all began very, very innocently. I'm in Skopje, and I see these things, and I begin wandering around the Charshia and asking, do you have any postcards? And out come boxes, and out come bags, and out come tins, and postcards are spilling off the thing. And then, I'm not going to name names, but I start realizing that people are talking, oh, do you know so-and-so, they're also collecting postcards? And then a funny thing happened, COVID. So you're sitting at home and you go, I wonder if I can find postcards online. Well, you can find them on eBay. Unfortunately, a lot of the German postcard vendors and the Turkish postcard vendors specialize in Ottoman era and early 20th century. But I want the whole thing. There is something called Delcamp, which is in France, and it's online vendors, and they funnel postcards through there, and you can find postcards. You know those little postcards of ASU? Those were on the Delcamp website. Those were not in my book. You know. So once you discover this and you find out that you can find postcards of anything, it starts becoming an obsession. So be careful. Be careful what you wish for. Yeah, you had a question.
Yes, first of all, thank you so much for this beautiful presentation. Not only you're a stellar scholar, but you're a compelling speaker. So we were all so engaged.
I hope so.
And this time flew so quickly. So I'm a big fan of postcards as well. So unfortunately, my first collection was destroyed in 2014. Second collection was destroyed in 2022. Now you understand where I'm from. So here in the United States for 3.5 years, I started collecting my new collection. So together with beautiful books by Dr. Crow and Dr. Batalden. So they all will travel with me now. All these beautiful postcards and books and materials from the Melikian Center. I'm not gonna, we have the phrase in Ukraine, step on the rake 3 times. So everything will be with me. So not to lose anything again. But my first question was about digitalization of the postcards, but you have already answered that. And the second question, maybe you know, is there a practice to conduct and to design a course for students like for example, history through postcards or through stamps or maybe music or art or whatever. It can be absolutely anything through postcards. David and Dr. Brown, you understand my thoughts. So this will be my next email. depending, so be ready with your money, depending on the answer, of course.
You about the digitization.
Mm-hmm.
So no, I'm not going to do this beautiful digitization, but I used Scrivener, and I can show you this on my computer. I have the digital archive.
Mm-hmm.
So I have the boxes, but I also have a digital archive where I have a catalog of all the postcards. I have an image of the postcard. I have all the data of the postcard. I have a transcription, if I could, of the handwriting. I have the translation. And all of that, then I have on my computer. So I always have my collection with me.
Okay.
So I can show that to you. While I haven't done a course, there are phenomenal books and articles. You could easily build a course around this. What I did do once in a language, politics, and identity class, it was a Slavic culture. I don't remember. I was asked to give a guest lecture, and I went to a junk store, and I bought 24 postcards, and I threw them into a hat, and told the students they had to pick a postcard, and their assignment was to do what I was suggesting with those ASU postcards. Where does this postcard lead you? What do you see? What stories does the postcard tell? And let them build out a history from the postcard.
Yeah, so this is part of the course assignment.
Yeah, and the students absolutely love doing it.
But do you think that the course can be built around this? Like, again, history through postcards? Or
First of all,
art?
if you give me 10 minutes, I will build a course around it. Because everything is connected. So, and there is tremendous secondary literature on postcards. So it's not like, I don't know, maybe there's a tremendous history on and secondary literature on thimbles, but I don't happen to know it's little sewing things. But postcards, because they travel, because they tell historical stories, people have done linguistic research. There are fascinating examples of language contact that I have seen on the postcards, dialect form, standard language standardization. If you send me, I'll be happy to share my bibliography.
Thank you so much. So it has a potential. David and Dr. Brown. Wait on me.
Just
Wait, look, the student hasn't asked one yet?
I'm sorry.
I still remember your question from yesterday, but yes.
I wrote this one down. Given like the city's like very like multicultural like nature over time, and how many things have been renamed and changed with the different eras of the city, do you think that the postcards especially like help inform the question of how to remember like one history without erasing another? And how do we like remember what's already been lost?
First of all, it's a great question. There is a great Turkish saying, which makes its way into all the Balkan languages. History will come out in the square. We think history is forgotten and buried, but guess what? It bubbles up. It's never gone. Something turns up in an archive, something appears in a postcard, somebody learns some inconvenient truths from their grandmother. So those forgotten histories have a way of coming back and reminding us that history, we're never starting from zero. We're never starting from a clean slate. So postcards just happen to be this beautiful visual memory when we talk about cities as palimpsests of different architectural periods and things happening at different historical times, because cities don't evolve uniformly. So the postcard image density, if I could get a little water, the image density of postcards of a place like Skopje, where there are so many, we could actually trace. I can see all the buildings being built. So you can look in the postcards, we can see the buildings coming up and the buildings coming down. We can see the line of the river and the way the key of the river is being rebuilt. So when we have all this image density, we can actually trace things, and when we start then going completely over the edge and start using a magnifying glass and start looking, we can start seeing what people are wearing. We can start reading the signs. And the city, in those past moments captured by a particular photographer, start unveiling things about the city that we didn't know. Like, for me, the fact that, I thought 1948, Tito Stalin break, that's kind of the end of that. I'm not going to say a hammer and sickle. And then I see, here's the banners to the commemoration of the 50th revolution. There's Lenin on the banners. There's the hammer and sickle. It kind of made me rethink my understanding of historical time.
Wherever you look, history is lost. It might be carried in the archival record. It might be carried in the geologic record. It might be carried in soldiers, in officers who are found shot to death in the middle of a field and nobody wants to admit who they are. And then by the we find out who killed those soldiers, who killed those officers. The history comes back. I don't think we can ever think that what we've done is not going to be unfolded in history. Just say, here. We don't know if Kasi.
Dave, Instagram, is that the new postcard or whatever comment you might want to, is that a new way of creating your own postcard?
Well, you can create your own postcard with a company called Razzle. You can pick your images and you can create your design. But so what? The point of the postcard was you were a person in physical state, in physical time, and you bought that postcard as an analog operation. If you're going to do a Razzle digital postcard, you buy it as well, send an email. And as for Instagram, I don't really download it. I'm a 20th century kind of way.
That's great. Well, we are at 8, and I'm sure there are people here who would be happy to show you what this one is. Please join me in thanking our distinct this lovely team. And please help us ensure that all the food outside of the drinks get consumed, and I usually have some more conversation. And David is pointing me to the QR code. Thank you, David. It would be great if you were willing to just scan that on your way out with your phone, scan on the QR codes, and fill out a little survey to let us know what you liked and how we can let you know about your works last put out there. So thank you all very much.
Yes, thanks all of you for coming. And thank you, students, for coming last night and tonight. And those of us who teach because we love working as we. So it's a real big CS.